Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the mistakes that people make. Everyone, and I mean everyone, has imperfections. That means politicians too, or perhaps I should say, especially politicians. Everyone, including politicians, make mistakes. But there are mistakes, and there are mistakes. Donald Trump, former president of the United States, dined with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes. This was not a mere lapse in judgment. It was a massive mistake. It was a mistake for so many reasons, and yet Donald Trump does not think that he erred. A former president and a declared candidate for presidency, once again, in 2024, cannot sit at the same table by his own invitation and dine with declared Jew haters. Can't do it. There is no way around this. There's no way out of it. Sitting down with two avowed Jew haters was not a lapse in judgment. It was a green light, a sign of recognition, a validation of Jew hatred by a top world leader, a man who held the undisputed highest office in the free world. Trump cannot just brush off this dissing of American and world Jewry as a scheduling mistake, or I just did not know incident. The ramification of this meeting is gargantuan. The former president gave credibility to these Jew haters by sitting down at the table with them. That simple act gave license to Jew haters across the United States and around the world to gloat. Their hateful point of view has been mainstreamed by this sitting down. Trump gave them credence. Trump's decision to dine with renowned, acknowledged, undisputable Jew haters deems their actions and their speech acceptable, mainstreams. Jew haters are now free to come out of the dark and espouse their vitriol in the open. If a former president can sit with Jew haters, that means that Jew haters' perspective is acceptable in mainstream society. After all, over 50% of US voters voted for Donald Trump at one time. If he entertains Jew haters, then we can proclaim our true hatred of Jews in public, they say. If he entertains Jew haters, then Jew hatred is not a marginal point of view, but rather a perspective of the mainstream marketplace of ideas, they say. Donald Trump, the man, has always been a human lightning rod. When it comes to Trump, almost nobody is neutral. You like him or you hate him. You appreciate his style and his moxie, or you deride his style and his moxie. You believe his presidency was good for the United States, or you are convinced that it was the worst presidency in your lifetime, if not in the last 2 centuries. As for me, I'm an equal opportunity critic. I criticize when I think it necessary, both sides of the political aisle, and I try to see the positive and the negative in people, including, or should I say, especially politicians. I cannot erase the good that Donald Trump did for Israel because of the bad he did with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes. Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel when no other world leader, when no other country would take that unpopular step. He was the first. Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, another big move. And Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, an essential component to the safety and security of Israel. But what Trump did by meeting with the anti-Semites outweighs the good he did for Israel in my eyes. Trump set the groundwork for Jew hatred and gave it credibility. He gave it credibility that normalizes ideas. He gave it a presidential seal of approval. When Trump was president, I thought, finally, a US president who understands us. I was willing to accept the problems, imperfections, the baggage that Trump brought with him. I thought that while flawed, he was at least on the correct path. His mistakes were not germane. They were character flaws and superficial. On essential issues, he was on target, especially with regard to Israel. So I thought. I also had tremendous faith in Ivanka, his Jewish daughter, and Jared, his Jewish son-in-law. Ivanka and Jared would keep him on the path and insist that he reject the ugly, xenophobic underbelly that was often around him. They would keep him away from the bile and hatred that simmers under the American veneer. I was wrong. As we all know, Ivanka and Jared have stepped aside from Donald Trump's future political dealings and his aspirations. They're no longer acting as his advisors. They are distancing themselves. One trusted political thinker told me that had Ivanka and Jared remained in the inner circle, this meeting would never have taken place. I'm inclined to believe that they were correct. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was sitting with them to spite Ivanka and Jared and breaking bread with these avowed Jew haters. After this much publicized meal at Mar-a-Lago and the lack of serious response by its host, Donald J. Trump, establishment Jewish communities must back away. Jews cannot, in good faith, back him. Jewish Republicans cannot support him. Jewish donors cannot invest in his campaign. And they've made that very clear. This sit-down was a huge error for Donald Trump, and it will have to pay the political price for it. And that price might be withdrawing his name as a candidate for president in 2024. That might actually be the price. We'll see. We cannot tolerate Jew hatred. We should not tolerate Jew hatred. We cannot give a platform to those who ignore Jew hatred. And our true friends are not the friends of Jew haters. That should be clear. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from Ynet. It's authored by Ben-Dror Yemini. We've looked at him quite a bit. It was published on December 6, 2022. The piece is entitled, Israel's Majority Wants a Jewish State, Not Religious Theocracy. Subtitled, Opinion. Those who voted for Netanyahu and his Likud party in the November 1st elections want them to protect the values of Judaism, not create a whole new ultra-Orthodox state led by homophobes promoting extremist views. This column addresses a critically important issue. Most, if not nearly all, Israelis want to preserve the Jewishness of the Jewish state, but they do not want their state to turn into a theocracy like Iran. And there is a big difference. Ben-Dror Yemini explains the difference in this very impressive column. This is how he begins. The right-wing religious bloc of the emerging coalition government is pointing to the majority, with the help of which they were elected as means to silence public resistance to its upcoming reforms. If the public chose a right-wing government, that's what they'll get, they claim. No more right-wingers will become centrists upon entering the Knesset. This all sounds reasonable. They were democratically elected, indeed. Thus, they have a right to call the shots according to their own agendas. However, is their majority pitch actually a myth? The majority, elected officials who they believe will protect the Jewish state, not create a binational one, split into two entities. The decision to put Bezalel Smotrich, a supporter of the land of Israel from the Jordan to the river to the sea, in charge of civil administration and influence the appointment of the IDF's coordinator of government activities in the territories in the West Bank, marks a step towards turning the IDF into a political body. Ben-Dror now laces into Bibi Netanyahu, asking why he turned over the state to the non-democratic forces in his government. The fact that Bibi was elected, he posits, does not permit him to convert the democracy into a theocracy, and that is the worry. Yemini continues to say, Netanyahu, have you gone mad? Do you really not understand what you're doing? You are single-handedly reinforcing the anti-Zionist bloc. You know this is against the national interest considering how sensitive this topic is to the outside world, especially the United States. The majority elected you not so you would turn Israel into an ultra-Orthodox religious theocracy. Now Ben-Dror Yemini explains that democracy is essential for the national interest, and that value overarches the priorities of the party. The people elected Likud, not the religious parties. Netanyahu chose to partner with the religious parties in order to form his government. And now Yemini writes this. The majority's choice was Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party. The majority, made up of a large percentage of right-wing voters, did not choose ultra-Orthodox coercion, and certainly did not choose key educational issues to be decided on by the most extreme representative of the coalition. The Prime Minister-designate on Monday tried to calm the public's outcries, promising that everything would be supervised and done in coordination. Now Yemini concludes, expressing the hope that Netanyahu will balance his coalition with the national needs of democracy. He writes, "We can only hope that Netanyahu manages to balance out the atrocities of the emerging coalition agreement. For now, however, it seems the coalition's interests are triumphing the national ones. This can be called many things, but what it certainly is not is fulfilling the wishes of the majority." This column is so important. Jews in the United States, much like Jews in Israel, are deeply concerned about what might be happening under this new government. They fear the worst. I too hope that Bibi has the skill and the balance to ultimately reach a good solution. Next up is a column by Helena Parker. It was published in the Times of Israel on December 10th, 2022. The piece is entitled "Jerusalem and the Graves of Pious Jews," subtitled, and it's a long subtitle, "Understanding the Historical Evolution of Jerusalem and Zion." This is how Parker begins her column. Hatikva, the Hope, is a Jewish poem describing the deep longing for all Jewish people to return to their land of Zion and their beloved holy city of Jerusalem. The poem was written in 1877 by an Austrian Jew named Naftali Hertz Imber. Naftali, who died in New York in 1909, never lived to witness the day when his poem became Israel's national anthem, nor did he ever get to see the tremendous tears of joy running down the cheeks of Holocaust survivors as they were finally standing on the officially declared soil of the State of Israel in 1948. Wow, that's extremely powerful, and it's a great description. As an aside, there are a few inaccuracies here and throughout the essay. I'm not going to correct Parker. My corrections will only be superficial. They will not change the substance of the piece, but it's important that I note that. Parker is speaking of the importance of Jerusalem to Jews and to Israel, to lovers and supporters of Israel. It may seem silly, even trivial, but in today's world there are many people who believe that Jerusalem does not belong to the Jews. And hence, this is why she writes, and this is what she writes. While the mention of Jerusalem in Hatikva is of great significance for the Jewish people who were forced out of their historical land so many times, it is not unusual at all to find Jerusalem mentioned in other Jewish works of art, ancient literature. In the Tanakh alone, Jerusalem is mentioned 669 times, and the Jewish poems, songs, stories, prayers, books, and other works of art dedicated to Jerusalem by Jews are countless. One of the main reasons that the Jewish people are so connected to their land to this day can be found in history, or more specifically, in a history that dates back over 3,500 years. Ancient scriptures show that long before Jerusalem became an area of modern dispute in the Middle East. It was a place of profound importance to the Israelite people of Canaan, today's Israeli and Palestinian territories. Parker now points out that for Islam, Jerusalem was not very important. She continues, despite contemporary claims assigning great historical importance to the city of Jerusalem in Islam, very little evidence has been found to support such arguments. In fact, there is no mention of Jerusalem at all in the Quran. And according to some translations, no real significance has been attached to the city even by the Hadith, another major source of guidance in Islam. It is not to say that the young religion of Islam, only introduced in the 7th century BC, does not have any links to the Holy City at all. Perhaps it is more to outline that every religion is unique in its evolution, geography, timelines, and places of worship. Despite the disagreements between them about who must be seen as the legitimate successor of the Prophet Muhammad, and the different directions they choose to follow in the past As a result, both the Sunni and Shia Muslims of today see the famous Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem only as next in its importance after the Masjid al-Haram, in other words, the Kaaba, in Mecca, and Al-Masjid al-Nabi Mosque in Medina. Other temples sacred to Islam can be found in Damascus, in Hebron, and other locations, many of which, just like Jerusalem, already contained established Jewish, Christian, and polytheist tribal communities long before the arrival of Islam. Now Parker explains that Jerusalem's Jewish history is 5,000 years old, and the others' history is short by relative standards. Others include Christianity and, of course, Islam. Quote, based on these, as well as on anthropological and archaeological, geographical, sociological, and other studies, both Christianity, approximately 2,000 years old, and Islam, approximately 1,400 years old, came long after Judaism were greatly inspired by the Jewish customs, beliefs, stories, and traditions, which can explain the many similarities found in the famous scriptures of the three religions. And while all of these changes were taking place in Zion, the holy ancient city of Jerusalem, with a history of over 5,021 years, has been destroyed twice, attacked 52 times, captured 44 times, and besieged 23 times, before finally reuniting for good with its ancient custodians, who, of course, are only happy for the other groups to visit their holy temples and other places of pilgrimage and enjoy Israel's bustling tourism and culture. In her conclusion, Parker writes that Jews also have graves of great pious people that Jews would like to visit, of course, control and supervise. Quote, many cultures evolve with support and guidance of elders or sages who are believed to possess unique strengths and qualities or knowledge that are important to the everyday life of the community. The Jewish culture also follows a similar tradition by paying an incredible amount of respect to a group of past spiritual leaders known as pious Jews, or tzaddikim, whose many graves have been visited by Jews for over a millennium and are some of Israel's most protected and important sites of worship. The location of these sites can be found in Jerusalem, Hebron, Mount Meron, Tiberias, Tzfat or Safed, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, Amuka, and more. I hesitated about whether or not to discuss this column. As a rule, I don't like or appreciate these kinds of arguments, but they have a place. While I find them reductive and defensive, sometimes they are important and make significant points. To state the obvious, this is the obvious. Jews have a true historical claim to Jerusalem. That's what she was trying to say. And to Israel proper. Parker wanted to prove that point in the Times of Israel. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 9 cartoons and memes today. Some are very similar, but on the same theme, but you'll enjoy them, I hope. First up is a wonderfully hilarious meme about Volkswagen. It reads, Volkswagen cars always makes me think of peace, love, and Nazis. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Volkswagen was the love bug. Even Volkswagen van, or the bus, as it was called, conjured up an image of free love. But it was, of course, Hitler's concept of a car for the people. Volk means people, and Wagen, of course, means car. This next meme makes fun of our economic situation. The meme reads, very few people know this, but the little pocket on your jeans is for your paycheck after taxes. That's funny. Now a cartoon that pokes fun at the cell phone culture. Everyone is always looking at their cell phone, even while crossing the street, and that's dangerous. We see a cartoon of the Beatles. The caption reads, imagine if Abbey Road was released today. Remember Abbey Road? One of the most iconic of Beatles albums. This next meme asks a deep question about the value of education. In the top frame, there are 2 great works of art. Below, there are 2 modern works of art. The top frame caption reads, without a single degree, they created art that inspired generations. And in the lower frame, the caption reads, and then the artists with degrees arrived. And indeed, that is hilarious. Online scams are everywhere. Beware, beware, beware. Caveat emptor, beware. This cartoon is entitled Holiday Scammer's Dream Victim. It reads, oh boy, a free smart TV. All I have to do is give them my credit card info and social security number to cover shipping. It's funny, but it's also sad. Despite all the warnings, there are still some very innocent people, susceptible people out there that fall victim to these terrible situations. This next is a classic dig on Trump and meeting with Kanye West and Mark Fuentes. It has the feel of a takeoff of a Schroeder from Peanuts. Maybe it's the hair. Trump character is all dirty and covered with dirt. Trump says, I didn't know they were dirty. This next three cartoons are all about Sam Bankman-Fried, aka SBF. All we know is he lost $33 billion overnight. In the first of the cartoons, SBF is pointing to Madoff saying amateur. In this next cartoon, it makes fun of the word fraud. SBF's last name is Fried. Instead of Fried, his name is changed to Fraud. As for those billions might have disappeared to, the cartoonist suggests it might be in his wild head of hair. Finally, SBF is selling crypto lemonade to an adult who says, it looks empty, kid. SBF convinces him, saying, it's transparent. We're laughing, but $33 billion is a large amount of money. That was just simply lost. Poof, just disappeared. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Australia's Foreign Minister announced that their government would place targeted sanctions on Russia and on Iran. These sanctions are a response to what the Foreign Minister called egregious human rights violations. In their statement, Foreign Minister Penny Wong explained that Australia was imposing Magnitsky-style sanctions on 13 individuals and 2 entities. Included in this group are Iran's morality police, the Basij resistance force, and 6 Iranians involved in crackdown on protests sparked by the death of a 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in September. In an opinion piece for the Sydney Morning Herald, Wong wrote that the sanctions also applied to Saeed Sadeh Husseini, whom she described as a senior commander in Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Husseini was being listed for his alleged role in the indiscriminate use of violence against protesters. She wrote, the Iranian regime's flagrant and widespread disregard for human rights of its own people has appalled Australians, and the perpetrators must be held accountable. Kudos to Australia for taking a public stand on this awful situation in Iran. Barbara Woodward, Britain's ambassador to the United Nations, said that Russia is attempting to obtain more weapons from, you guessed it, Iran. She said that these weapons include hundreds of ballistic missiles. Woodward went on to explain that Iran's weapon of proliferation poses a real and significant threat to the international community. She said that Russia is offering Iran an unprecedented level of military and technical support in return for the missiles. This symbiotic relationship between Iran and Russia is very frightening for all nations, for the world. Iran executed a protester who was convicted of injuring a security guard with a knife and closing off a street in Tehran, the capital city of Iran, during a protest. The Tasnim, Iran's semi-official news agency, reported a partial clampdown on a nationwide unrest that was erupted in response to the death of Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman who died on September 16th. The protests of Amini's death has sparked and represent one of the biggest challenges to Islamic Republic since its establishment in 1979. The Tasnim news agency identified the person who was executed as Mohsen Shekari, but they gave no more details. Executing a person for a knife attack and for closing a street is excessive even in Iran. It sends a message to the protesters. The protests are growing in size, in frequency, and in locations. Iranian leadership is feeling pressured. Iranian citizens are feeling empowered. According to Reuters, the sister of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has condemned his crackdown on nationwide protests and called on the widely feared Revolutionary Guards to lay down their weapons. According to a letter published by her son, who lives in France, Badri Husseini Khamenei, who resides in Iran, criticized the clerical establishment of Iran starting from the time of the Islamic Republic's late founder, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, all the way to today, and her brother's rule. The letter was dated December 2022. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the Hebrew word for friend is chaver? Chaver. I began by explaining that our friends do not associate with our enemies. Machiavelli explained that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. In Jewish tradition, friendship is greater when cemented with a strong bond, not just a bond of association and common interest. A chaver in Jewish tradition learns together and eats together with you. Learning together creates a bond and a link that is lasting and powerful. In Aramaic, the word for such a friend is nearly the same as it is in Hebrew. It's chavruta. And traditionally we learn in pairs. In chavruta, my partner in learning is called my chavruta. When the learning group is more than two, it is called a chabura. Very similar. When friends are together, we are commanded to learn. It is for that reason that when we dine together as a group, the Hebrew grace after meals, the Birkat Hamazon, begins with the words Chavurai Nevorech, friends let us bench. Because when three or more are together, they should be learning. In Latin, there's a tiny overlap in language and concept here. The word for friend is compagnon, also in French. Com, of course, means together, and pan means bread. A companion is one with whom you share bread, a chaver. And that, my friends, is what I hope to do and hope that we do together. We learn together and we laugh together. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.